And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this final segment, we are going to be looking at the NBA's power rankings for Week 13. They were released a few hours ago, so we're going to go ahead and look at that. I just had to open up the website for a little bit, so I apologize for taking a little bit of a long time to get that all set up and things like that. So here we have the power rankings going into Week 13. So I don't think the Cavs are going to be the number one team, but then again, I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, they are. I would have figured that their loss to the Pacers would have brought them down a little bit in the rankings, but it doesn't really seem like that that sort of mattered. They won the first matchup between the two best teams in the league. The last time they went around, aside from their Pacers loss, I think it makes sense why they were able to. Why they were able to still be in the top the top spot of all the power rankings. Now, they had their worst offensive performance ever against the Pacers. So I guess, that one bad performance is pushed a little bit under the rug. And they still remain to be one of the best teams on the offensive side of the ball. And, when you're the best team, you could just see that their net rating, being ranked second, it really puts them in a good position. Their defensive rating also being in the top 10 also puts them in a really good spot. Having Evan Mobley there and Jarrett Allen there as well, that's just great additions to an already you need those additions, especially when at the guard position, your defense is a little bit meh, at least, with the two starting guards that they have. So having good defenders in the starting lineup to pair with those two offensive powerhouses is pretty good. And obviously, Evan Mobley is just as good on the offense as he is on the defense, and that's saying a lot. Now, OKC, they moved down one. It's really just going to be, it seems like throughout most of the year, those two teams have flip-flopped between the 1 and the 2 spot, with the exception of the Boston Celtics, who remained at the top for a really long time. Now that the rest of the NBA games have sort of concluded on with the rest of the week, then, it's been drawn down to just these two teams flip-flopping between number 1 and number 2. And, of course, the Boston Celtics whenever they feel like joining in the mix as well. So it's like the top 3 teams, they're always going to be Cleveland, OKC, and Boston, but depending on the week, number 1 is probably going to be different. Like, it could be between OKC, it could be between Boston, things like that, so I don't really have any complaints there. Houston, they ended up jumping up to number 4 as opposed to being at number 5. Again, they are one of the top 5 teams in this league, so I have no problem with them being at number 4 or at 5, especially when the team below them is the Memphis Grizzlies. This Grizzlies team, they've been quiet, but despite the fact that they've been quiet, they have been very efficient, and they've sort of done what a lot of people really, expect them to do, right? Like, we expect them, geez, the stutter was real there, but we expect them to be a competent team when they're fully healthy and when they have Ja Morant. So they're not really surprising anyone. I mean, they didn't really have Ja Morant at all last year, which was the big reason why they weren't a competent team. But now that they have him, it makes sense that they're back to winning again. Now, the Knicks, they drop a couple of spots, and that makes a little bit of sense considering how they got destroyed by the Thunder in the last game. And beating the Bucks and by how much that they did most likely kept them from being ranked out of the top 8, at least in my opinion, because that win was just very, very dominant. The Denver Nuggets being stuck at 7, I guess that makes a little bit of sense. They're not really, again, I don't think they're a team that's really going to make it far in the postseason, but so far they seem to have gotten on the right track with Russell Westbrook and with Nikola Jokic. It seems like they're sort of starting to make ends meet. Now, the next team is the Pacers, which is a little bit surprising, but obviously their big win against the Cavs is going to give them a little bit of a boost in their rating. So it makes some sense why they're ranked so high. The Timberwolves being a top 10 team, I don't necessarily agree with. I mean, their record is already flimsy as it is, and combined with that roster not being nearly as good as what it was last year, I don't think putting them at number 9 is very makes a lot of sense. Now, the Clippers, they're here because they were unable to play in the last game. I think that if they played against the Hornets, they would have been able to stayed over the Minnesota Timberwolves, at least in my opinion, because the Clippers, while they also lost a very important player to their rotation, losing Paul George in the beginning of the season, I still think that they are a better team than the Timberwolves. Like, it doesn't feel like they lost. Now, the Dallas Mavericks, they ended up dropping a little bit. Makes sense because, they don't have Luka or Kyrie. They benefited a lot from beating the Lakers and the Blazers without them, but still, it's like not a very competent team when they don't have their two best players. Go figure. And the Lakers being dropped down to number 12, I guess that makes a little bit of sense, seeing as how they weren't really able to win that much over the weekend, especially on the road, going 0-2 on a trip to Texas before having 2 games postponed. Not a very good recipe for success there, especially with all of those other stuff that's going on in LA. It's a very big and a necessary distraction. The Bucks, they move up a little bit despite getting absolutely wrecked by the New York Knicks, which, again, I think moving them down to 16, they did beat the Orlando Magic, which I guess makes sense why they're over them in this week's power rankings, but still, I don't think that the Bucks are a better team when Orlando is fully healthy, and I will say that they are better than the Kings as well, so not really a good example of, and they... Given that Jimmy Butler wants to leave the Miami Heat, they're also better than them. So I guess moving them up to just switching the Orlando Magic and the Bucks is like the best move in this week's power rankings, because I do feel like they are better than most of these other teams. But then again, I don't really feel like these other teams deserve the ranking that they're in either. Now, Golden State being ranked at 17, I guess, being in that mid-tier area makes a little bit of sense. The Pistons moving up, finally being positive, 20-19, a 9-2 stretch in their last 11 games. Obviously, it's been looking a lot better for Detroit than what it was the last few years, so can't really complain much there. Phoenix being a number 19, again, another mid-tier team. We'll have to see where they rank at the end after they trade away Bradley Beal, if that ends up happening. The Spurs dropping from 15 to 20, that makes sense. Atlanta dropping from 18 to 21. And then the rest of the teams are most likely going to stay the same. Yeah, Philly dropping all the way to 23, that makes much more sense. Portland moving over to here, Utah here. The rest of these teams, being at the bottom of the list, obviously, there's not really much of a difference between the teams that are on the bottom of this list as there are with the teams on the top of this list. But again, I don't really have a problem with the bottom half of this list whatsoever. And it's usually that mid tier where the Bucks get ranked is where the problem starts. But aside from that, not a very controversial list. At least it's definitely far from the most controversial list that they have, so I have no problems with this list. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of these power rankings, but that's all that I have for today. That's it for the show. Thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. As usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether or not it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question. And if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box. And if that's not your thing, you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or really helps the show. That's all that I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.